In a large house filled with gold chandeliers and expensive paintings, the air was always full of music. Every evening, the sound of piano keys echoed through the long hallways. Guests in shiny clothes would gather around, clinking glasses and whispering about the latest concerts, the latest artists, and the beauty of the music. It was a world of elegance where art was praised and talent was treated like treasure. But in one small corner of that house, far from the polished floors and glowing lights, a young boy named Aaron quietly listened from behind a door. Aaron was the son of the maid. His mother worked from sunrise until late at night, cleaning the rooms, carrying trays, and scrubbing the floors until her hands hurt. She never complained, even when her back ached or her clothes got wet. She only smiled at her son and said, "Work hard, my child. Someday you will live differently." Aaron believed her. He always did. But what gave him hope more than anything was the sound of the piano that filled the mansion every night. He loved the piano more than anything in the world. Every time the pianist started to play, he would leave whatever chore he was doing and stand near the kitchen door, eyes closed, listening. He could feel every note deep inside him, like the music was speaking straight to his heart. He didn't know how to play, and he had never touched a piano before, but he memorized the sounds, the rhythm, and the way the music changed from soft to powerful. It made him dream. It made him forget he was just a servant's son. Sometimes, when the big hall was empty, Aaron would sneak in for a few seconds. He would stand near the grand piano, his eyes wide, staring at the shining black surface and the white keys. It looked like a magical thing, something from another world. He wanted to touch it, to feel what it was like to create music with his own hands. But he was afraid. If anyone saw him, he knew he would be scolded. The piano was not for him. It was for the rich and the talented, not for the boy who helped his mother clean. One evening, the mansion was preparing for a special event. The owner of the house was hosting a famous pianist, a man known across the city for his brilliant performances. The guests were excited, and the staff was working double to make everything perfect. Aaron helped his mother polish the floors, clean the tables, and carry the silver trays. He was tired, but when he heard the sound of the piano being tuned upstairs, his eyes lit up. Tonight, he thought, there would be music again. As the sun set and the guests began to arrive, Aaron hid behind the curtain near the kitchen door. He could see a little part of the hall through the gap. The men were in black suits and the women in glittering dresses. The sound of laughter and chatter filled the air until finally everything went quiet. The pianist had entered the room. He was tall, confident, and dressed perfectly. When he sat at the piano, everyone watched in silence. Then his hands moved, smooth, fast, graceful. The music that came out was like a storm and a whisper at the same time. Aaron couldn't look away. He watched every movement, memorizing it. He imagined himself sitting there instead, his fingers dancing over the keys. The thought made his heart race. The performance went on for a long time, and the guests were amazed. They clapped loudly after every piece, praising the pianist and asking for more. But what they didn't see was a small boy in the corner of the room, quietly moving his fingers in the air, pretending to play along. Aaron wasn't mocking. He was learning. When the performance ended, the pianist stood and bowed. The crowd cheered, and the host proudly called him the best musician in the city. The pianist smiled and said that no one could match his talent in this house, not even close. The guests laughed. They believed it too. But at that moment, Aaron whispered softly to himself, "I can play that song." He didn't realize someone had heard him. One of the servants nearby, trying to act clever, repeated his words loudly. The guests turned. The laughter stopped for a second, and then the pianist raised an eyebrow. "What did you say?" he asked with a half-smile. The servant pointed toward the curtain. "It wasn't me, sir. It was the maid's boy." Aaron froze. Every head turned toward him. His heart started pounding so loud he could almost hear it. He wanted to run, but his feet wouldn't move. The pianist crossed his arms and said almost teasingly, "The maid's son can play the piano. That's new." The room filled with small laughs again. The host, amused, said, "Oh, let him come out. Let us hear what he has to say." Aaron slowly stepped out from behind the curtain, his eyes on the floor. He felt everyone's eyes burning into him. Some guests were smiling. Others looked annoyed that a servant's child had disturbed their evening. "You said you can play my song?" the pianist asked, his tone sharp but playful. Aaron hesitated. He hadn't meant to challenge anyone. It had just slipped out. He wanted to explain, but the pianist interrupted. "Come, boy. Show us." The piano was right there. A wave of laughter filled the room. Some whispered, "This will be funny." Others said, "What a bold child." Aaron's mother, standing by the side with a tray, looked terrified. She wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Her son had already stepped forward. Every step felt heavy. He could hear people whispering and giggling. The pianist leaned back, arms crossed, clearly enjoying the moment. To everyone else, it was just a joke, a servant's son pretending to be a musician. But for Aaron, it was something else. It was a chance, maybe his only one. When he reached the piano, he hesitated. His fingers hovered over the keys. He had never played one before, not really, but he remembered the sound. Every single note he had ever heard from behind that door. He closed his eyes for a second and took a deep breath. He could feel everyone staring at him. Some were whispering that this would be embarrassing. Others just waited to laugh. The room was silent except for the faint sound of the fire crackling in the fireplace. The pianist gave a small smirk. "Go on," he said. "Play." Aaron slowly pressed a key. Then another. The first few notes came out soft, unsure. A few people chuckled quietly. But then something changed. Aaron's fingers began to move faster, more confidently. The melody began to take shape. The same piece the pianist had played earlier, but with a touch of emotion that felt deeper, more real. It wasn't perfect, but it was beautiful. The laughter faded. One by one, the smiles disappeared. The guests leaned forward, listening. Even the pianist, who had been ready to mock, now looked surprised. Aaron didn't look at anyone. He was lost in the music. His small fingers moved quickly, repeating the rhythm he had memorized through sound alone. When the last note faded, the room was silent. No one spoke. No one laughed. The boy looked up, breathing hard, unsure of what he had just done. He had only wanted to play, to show what he felt inside. But now everyone was staring at him, not with amusement but with disbelief. The pianist finally stood up, his face unreadable. Aaron stepped back, afraid he had done something wrong. But the man didn't scold him. He simply asked softly, "Who taught you to play like that?" Aaron hesitated before answering. "No one," he said. "I just listened." The room stayed silent. The pianist looked down at the keys, then back at the boy. The guest didn't know what to say. The laughter that had filled the hall earlier was gone, replaced by something else. Respect, maybe, or wonder. The maid, standing at the side, wiped a tear from her eye. That night, when everyone left and the lights went dim, Aaron helped his mother clean the hall. She didn't scold him. She just touched his shoulder and whispered, "You were brave, my son." He smiled softly, tired but happy. For the first time, he felt like someone had seen him, not as the maid's boy, but as something more. And as he looked at the piano one last time before leaving, he promised himself something. One day he would play again. Not in secret, not by chance, but on a stage where the world could hear him. The next morning, the mansion was quiet again. The grand hall that had been full of laughter and applause the night before was now empty, except for the smell of candles that had burned all night. Aaron walked in slowly with his mother, helping her pick up glasses and plates from the tables. He could still feel the echo of the moment when he had played the piano. His heart still raced when he thought about it. He had never touched those keys before, but somehow when he sat there, the music had just come out, like it had been waiting inside him all along. His mother didn't say much that morning. She worked quietly, wiping the tables one by one. When Aaron handed her a tray, she stopped for a moment and looked at him. There was pride in her eyes mixed with worry. "You were very brave last night," she said softly. "But you must be careful. Not everyone likes it when someone like us stands in their light." Aaron didn't fully understand what she meant, but he nodded. He knew she wasn't angry, just scared for him. Later that day, as they cleaned near the music room, Aaron couldn't help but peek at the piano again. The sunlight from the tall windows made the black surface shine. It looked peaceful now, no audience, no whispers, just quiet. His fingers itched to touch the keys again, but he remembered his mother's warning. He stood there for a few seconds, staring, and then turned away. But before he could walk off, a voice spoke from behind. "You have something special, boy." Aaron turned around quickly. It was the same pianist from last night. He hadn't heard him come in. The man was standing near the door, watching him closely. Aaron froze, unsure what to say. He bowed his head slightly like his mother had taught him when speaking to guests. "I didn't mean to upset anyone," Aaron said quietly. "I just wanted to play." The pianist smiled faintly. "You didn't upset me. You surprised me." He walked closer, his shoes clicking on the marble floor. "You played a piece most students struggle with. And you did it." "By ear?" Aaron nodded. "I listen every night when you play. I remember the sounds." The man studied him carefully, then looked at the piano. "Do you want to learn how to play properly?" The question hit Aaron like a wave. Of course he wanted to, more than anything. But he hesitated. He looked down at his dusty shoes, his worn shirt. "I can't," he said finally. "We don't have money. My mother works here." The pianist nodded slowly. "Sometimes the best musicians don't come from music schools," he said. "They come from the heart. Remember that." He gave Aaron a small smile and left the room. Aaron stood there unsure if it was real, but that moment those words stayed in his heart. Over the next few days things changed in small ways. The guests who had laughed at him no longer did. Some of them even greeted him kindly. Others still ignored him, pretending the night had never happened. But Aaron didn't mind. He had touched the piano once, and that feeling was enough to keep him dreaming. Every chance he got, he stood near the door listening to the pianist practice. Sometimes the man would glance his way and give a small nod, as if silently telling him to keep learning. One afternoon, while helping his mother clean the dining room, Aaron heard the faint sound of the piano again. But this time it wasn't the usual melody. It was a slow, soft tune, almost sad. He followed the sound carefully, peeking into the music room. The pianist was there, but he wasn't alone. The mansion's owner stood beside him, speaking quietly. The owner was an older man with sharp eyes and a proud face. He had heard about the boy's performance that night and wasn't too pleased. "It was amusing, yes," the man said. "But we can't have servants thinking they can stand beside our guests. It causes confusion." Aaron froze. His chest felt tight. He wanted to run, but he couldn't move. The pianist sighed. "With respect, sir, that boy has real talent. You can't hide it. You should be proud that he came from your house, Key." The owner frowned. "Talent means nothing without the right name. People like him don't belong on stage." His words cut deep, even though they weren't said to Aaron directly. The pianist didn't argue further. He just nodded politely. When the owner left, he turned toward the doorway where Aaron was hiding. "You heard, didn't you?" he said softly. Aaron nodded slowly, his eyes wet. "Don't let his words stop you," the man said. "Music doesn't care who you are." From that day on, the pianist began to leave small sheets of paper near the piano. Simple notes, small exercises, and short songs. Aaron didn't know if they were meant for him, but each time he found one, he would secretly practice in his mind. He'd trace the movements with his fingers in the air while sweeping or polishing, whispering the notes under his breath. At night, after everyone was asleep, he would sneak into the hall. The moonlight would fall across the piano, and the room would be silent. Aaron would sit there, barely breathing, afraid someone might catch him. He would play the softest notes he could, just enough to hear. Slowly, he began to improve. His fingers learned how to move more smoothly, how to listen not just with his ears but with his heart. Sometimes his mother would wake up and find his bed empty. She would walk quietly into the hall and watch him from afar. She never stopped him. She just smiled sadly, knowing her son was chasing something bigger than either of them could imagine. Weeks passed. The mansion hosted more events, more guests, and more music. But word about the boy's secret talent had started to spread. Some guests whispered about him in curiosity, while others still treated it as a funny story. One evening, as the pianist was getting ready for another performance, the host decided to bring it up again. "Remember that little show we had last time?" he said, laughing lightly. "The boy who played by memory? Let's see if he can do it again. Give us a little entertainment." The pianist looked uncomfortable. "Sir, he's just a child. He doesn't need to be put on display." But the host insisted. "Oh, come on. It will be amusing. Call him." Someone went to fetch Aaron. His mother tried to stop them, but they said the master of the house had ordered it. Aaron's hands trembled when he entered the hall. He looked around at the guests, all those eyes staring at him again. Some were smiling kindly, others smirking. The pianist met his gaze and gave a small, reassuring nod. Aaron took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. This time there was no laughter, just curiosity. He started to play. The piece was different from last time, gentler, more emotional. The room slowly grew quiet. The laughter faded. The music seemed to tell a story, of struggle, of hope, of someone trying to rise above where they came from. The guests leaned forward, some closing their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. When Aaron finished, no one clapped right away. They just sat there stunned. Then slowly the pianist began to applaud. One by one, others joined. Even the host smiled, though his pride was slightly bruised. Afterward, when the guests left, the pianist walked up to Aaron. "You see?" he said softly. "They may not understand now, but one day they will." Aaron looked at him and smiled shyly. "Do you think I can really become a pianist someday?" he asked. The man looked at him for a long moment before replying, "You already are one." That night, Aaron went to bed later than usual. He lay awake staring at the ceiling. For the first time, the dream didn't feel impossible anymore. Somewhere deep inside, he knew his life was about to change. He just didn't know how soon. Outside, the rain started to fall softly against the windows. The piano in the hall stood silent, but its sound still played in Aaron's mind like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Days turned into weeks, and weeks slowly passed into months. The mansion remained alive with laughter, guests, and music, but something had quietly changed inside it. The young boy who once only listened from behind doors was no longer just a shadow. People began to notice him. Not everyone spoke to him, but many watched him out of curiosity when he walked by, carrying trays or helping his mother. Some of the guests even whispered that he might become someone important one day. Others still saw him as nothing more than a maid's son who got lucky for a moment. But Aaron didn't care about the whispers. All he wanted was to learn more. Whenever the house was quiet, he practiced in secret. The pianist, who now treated him like a student, would sometimes stay behind after his official performances. He would pretend to be adjusting the piano or organizing sheet music, but in truth, he was waiting for Aaron. He started teaching him small lessons in hidden moments. How to place his fingers, how to feel the rhythm, how to play not with fear but with emotion. Aaron learned fast. Every note he played sounded stronger, clearer, and more alive. His mother, though still worried, began to smile more. She saw how happy he became whenever he played, and even though she feared what others might say, she could not stop him. She often said to him at night, "If it makes your heart shine, then never let it go." Those words gave him courage. One cold evening, the mansion hosted another grand celebration. Important guests from different cities arrived, including musicians and sponsors who supported the arts. The host wanted to impress them, and everything was prepared perfectly. The food, the decorations, and of course the music. The pianist was to perform again that night, and the hall was filled with excitement. But fate had other plans. Just before the performance, the pianist injured his wrist while helping move a heavy chair. It wasn't serious, but it was enough to stop him from performing that evening. The host was furious. "What do you mean you can't play?" he said. "These people came to hear music." The pianist tried to explain, but his wrist hurt too much to move properly. As everyone panicked, Aaron stood quietly near the kitchen door, holding a tray. His heart beat fast. He wanted to say something, but he didn't know if he should. Then the pianist caught his eye. For a brief second, their eyes met, and the man gave him a small nod, one that said, "You can do it." The host, desperate and angry, asked if there was any other musician in the house. One of the servants nervously said, "The maid's boy. He can play." The room went silent for a moment. The host frowned. "That child again?" he said with disbelief. "This is not the time for jokes," but the pianist stepped forward. "Let him try," he said firmly. "You want music? Let him play." Everyone in the room turned toward Aaron. The guests whispered among themselves. Some looked amused, others curious. The host didn't seem pleased, but with no other choice, he agreed. "Fine," he said sharply. "If he fails, you'll be the one to explain, not me." Aaron walked toward the piano, his hands trembling slightly. The hall was larger than ever, the light brighter, and the faces watching him seemed endless. His mother stood by the wall, frozen with worry. But when Aaron looked at her, she nodded slowly, giving him strength. He sat down and took a deep breath. For a few seconds, the whole room was silent. Then his fingers touched the keys. The first few notes floated softly through the air, delicate and calm. The guests leaned forward, expecting a mistake. But the mistake never came. Instead, the melody began to grow, smooth, deep, full of emotion. He played one of the pieces the pianist had secretly taught him, but he added his own touches, tiny changes that made the music feel new and alive. It wasn't just skill, it was feeling. Every note told a story, of struggle, of longing, of a boy who had learned by listening through walls. Slowly, the guests' faces began to change. The smirks faded. Conversation stopped. Even the host, who had crossed his arms in frustration, now lowered them and listened quietly. Aaron's hands moved faster but not recklessly. Each movement had purpose. Each sound carried meaning. As he played, Aaron forgot where he was. The hall, the people, the lights, all disappeared. There was only him and the piano. The music filled every corner of the room like a warm breeze, gentle but powerful. When the final note faded, there was silence, pure, deep silence. Then, one by one, people began to clap. Slowly at first, then louder, stronger. The hall erupted with applause. Some guests even stood. The pianist, smiling proudly from the corner, nodded with satisfaction. Aaron's mother wiped tears from her eyes, her heart full. The host, still shocked, walked toward the boy. He looked down at him, speechless for a moment. Finally, he said quietly, You played beautifully." He didn't smile much, but there was a trace of respect in his eyes. "Maybe I misjudged you." Aaron didn't know what to say. He just bowed his head slightly and whispered, "Thank you." After the guests left that night, the pianist called Aaron aside. "You did something special today," he said. "You didn't just play music, you touched people's hearts." He placed his good hand gently on Aaron's shoulder. "Remember, talent like yours must be shared with the world. Promise me you won't stop." Aaron nodded. "I promise," but not everyone in the mansion was happy. Some of the other servants whispered behind his back, jealous of the attention he was getting. "He's just lucky," one of them said. "He's still a servant like the rest of us." Another added, "If he keeps showing off, he'll get both himself and his mother in trouble." Aaron heard some of those whispers, but he stayed quiet. He knew that dreams always made others uncomfortable. Still, deep inside, the words hurt. A few days later, the pianist told him something that would change everything. "I have to leave the city for a while," he said. "But before I go, I want you to keep practicing. Never stop. When I return, I'll take you somewhere you can really learn." Aaron's heart lifted. "You mean a music school?" he asked eagerly. The man smiled. "Something like that. You'll see." They practiced together for one last time that afternoon. The pianist showed him new techniques, corrected his posture, and shared stories of famous musicians who came from humble beginnings. When they finished, he said softly, "You have the kind of gift that can't be taught. Protect it." When the man left a few days later, the mansion felt emptier. Aaron missed him, but he didn't stop practicing. Every night he sneaked into the hall and played under the moonlight. His music grew better, richer. Sometimes his mother would stand by the door, listening quietly with pride and fear mixed in her heart. One evening, while Aaron was playing, the host of the house entered quietly without him noticing. He stood in the shadows, listening. When the song ended, he spoke, making Aaron jump. "You really do love this, don't you?" he said. Aaron turned nervous. "Yes, sir. I do." The man walked closer. "I used to play when I was young," he said. "But life got busy and I stopped." He looked at the piano for a long moment. "Don't stop, boy. People like me always regret the things they never finished." Those words stayed with Aaron. It was strange hearing kindness from someone who once looked down on him. Maybe, he thought, music had the power to change more than just moments. It could change hearts. As days passed, Aaron began to feel something growing inside him. Confidence. He started to dream bigger. He wanted to play not just for the rich, but for everyone. He imagined performing on a real stage under bright lights where his mother could sit in the front row, proud and smiling. But dreams, no matter how beautiful, always come with tests. And Aaron didn't know it yet, but the biggest challenge of his young life was just around the corner. It would test his courage, his heart, and his belief in himself more than anything he had faced before. Winter arrived early that year. The cold wind swept through the narrow streets outside the mansion, and frost began to cling to the windows. Inside, the warmth of fire and the soft light of chandeliers made everything look peaceful, but in Aaron's heart there was a storm. The pianist who had believed in him hadn't returned yet, and no letters had come. Each day that passed made Aaron more restless. He kept practicing every night, but deep inside he missed the guidance, the encouragement, and the simple smile that once told him he was doing well. One evening, after a long day of work, Aaron sat by the piano again. The house was quiet, everyone asleep. He touched the keys and began to play a soft tune. The notes echoed gently through the hall, wrapping the silence in warmth. But after a few minutes he stopped. His hands froze. He sighed deeply. For the first time the piano didn't sound the same. Something was missing, the joy, the connection. He rested his forehead on the piano and whispered, "What if I can't do it anymore?" At that moment his mother appeared from the corner, carrying a folded blanket. She had been watching quietly. "You can," she said softly. "You just forgot why you started." Aaron looked up. "I started because I wanted to be like him," he said. His mother smiled gently. "No, my son. You started because the music made you feel alive. Don't lose that." Her words sank deep into his heart. He smiled faintly, nodding. She left the blanket beside him and went back to her room. Aaron stayed for hours that night, playing not for anyone else but for himself. The next morning the mansion buzzed with excitement. A famous art sponsor from another city was coming for dinner, and everyone was preparing to make the evening perfect. The host wanted to impress him, as this man supported talented artists and musicians across the country. The staff cleaned every corner, polished every glass, and decorated the hall with flowers. Aaron helped his mother in the dining room, but his heart raced when he overheard two servants whispering. "They say the sponsor loves piano performances," one of them said. "He always supports young talent." The other replied, "If the master pleases him, he might even fund a music academy." Aaron's mind began to spin with possibilities. What if this was his chance? What if he could show his music to someone who truly understood it? But then doubt crept in. The host had already made it clear before that he didn't want Aaron to be the center of attention again. He feared that one mistake could ruin everything. Still, the thought refused to leave Aaron's mind. That evening, the guests arrived. The sponsor was a kind-faced man with silver hair and eyes that sparkled when he smiled. He was known for discovering young musicians from unlikely places. The host greeted him warmly and invited everyone to the dining hall. After dinner, as usual, music filled the air. But this time, something unexpected happened. The pianist, who usually played for events, was delayed by snow. His carriage hadn't arrived. The host tried to stay calm, but inside he was panicking. The sponsor, however, didn't seem upset. "Perhaps," he said kindly, "someone else in your home can play. I believe every place hides a hidden gem." The host forced a smile, but his eyes darted toward the servants. Then he noticed Aaron standing near the corner holding a tray. The room went silent. The same idea crossed everyone's mind at once. The sponsor smiled and said, "What about that boy? He looks like he has music in his soul." Aaron's hands trembled. The host hesitated. "He's just a worker," he said quickly, but the sponsor raised an eyebrow. "And what is music if not the work of the soul? Let him play. I would like to hear him." There was no way to refuse now. The guests turned toward Aaron, some smiling, others whispering. His mother's heart pounded in her chest as she watched from the doorway. Aaron placed the tray down, wiped his hands on his apron, and slowly walked toward the piano. The hall was bright and silent. The fire crackled softly in the corner. He sat down, took a deep breath, and touched the keys. His heart raced, but he remembered his mother's words, "Play because it makes you feel alive." So he closed his eyes and began. The music that came out was unlike anything he had ever played before. It was gentle at first, then powerful, full of warmth and emotion. Each note painted a story of dreams born in silence, of a child who listened behind doors, of a mother's faith, and of courage that grew in the face of fear. The sponsor's eyes widened. The guests leaned forward, completely still. Even the host, who had feared embarrassment, stood frozen. When the final note faded, there was silence again. For a moment, no one moved. Then the sponsor began to clap. Slowly, everyone joined him. The hall filled with applause so loud it seemed to shake the walls. Aaron's mother covered her mouth, tears running down her cheeks. The sponsor walked toward the boy with a smile. "That," he said softly, "was music with a soul. What is your name, son?" "Aaron," he replied shyly. The man nodded. "Aaron, you have a gift. Have you ever trained before?" Aaron shook his head. No, sir, I just listened. The sponsor looked amazed. He turned to the host and said, "You are a lucky man to have such a talent in your home." The host smiled weakly, unsure how to respond. Then the sponsor faced Aaron again. "Would you like to learn properly? To study music?" Aaron's eyes widened. "Yes, sir," he said, his voice trembling with excitement. "Good," said the sponsor. "I will make arrangements. I have a small academy in the city where young talents are trained. You belong there." The hall erupted in surprise. The host, though caught off guard, managed a polite smile. Aaron's mother wept openly, her heart overflowing with pride. The sponsor patted Aaron's shoulder gently. "I will send word soon. Keep practicing. The world needs to hear you." That night, after everyone left, the mansion was quiet again. Aaron sat near the piano, his heart still racing. His mother came and sat beside him. For a long time, they didn't speak. Then she said, "Do you see now, my son? When you follow what's inside you, even the world notices." Aaron nodded, unable to hold back his tears. He hugged her tightly. "Thank you," he whispered, "for believing in me when no one else did." Days passed, and true to his word, the sponsor sent a letter. It was addressed to Aaron, inviting him to the city to begin formal training. The host agreed to let him go, though not without hesitation. "Don't forget where you came from," he said sternly. Aaron promised he never would. When the day came, the servants gathered to say goodbye. Some smiled genuinely, others looked envious, but everyone knew this was something rare. Aaron's mother packed his small bag with a few clothes and wrapped a scarf around his neck. "Play every note with your heart," she said. "And no matter how big the stage gets, never stop being my little boy." He hugged her tightly, tears filling his eyes. Then he climbed onto the carriage waiting outside. As it rolled away from the mansion, he looked back through the window. The piano stood near the tall windows, shining in the morning sun. He smiled softly. That piano had changed his life. The road ahead was long, and Aaron didn't know what waited for him in the city. But one thing was clear. He was no longer the maid's son hiding behind doors. He was a musician now with dreams too big for silence. And as the carriage disappeared into the distance, the wind carried a faint whisper of the melody he had played that night, the one that had opened the world to him. The city was nothing like Aaron had ever seen before. The streets were wide and full of people who seemed to always be in a hurry. Horses pulled carriages past tall buildings that shimmered with light. The sounds of the city blended into a kind of restless music. Street vendors calling out, bells ringing and laughter echoing from corners. Aaron pressed his face to the carriage window as he took it all in. He clutched his mother's small scarf tightly in his hands, a reminder of home and the promise he had made to her. When he arrived at the academy, he was speechless. The building was enormous, made of stone and glass, with a garden full of flowers and tall trees that seemed to whisper secrets. Students hurried through the gates, carrying books and instruments. It felt like stepping into another world, one where everyone spoke the language of music. A man from the academy greeted him and led him inside. The halls were lined with portraits of musicians from the past, and the faint sound of piano notes drifted from nearby rooms. Aaron was given a small room to stay in. It wasn't big, but to him it felt like a palace. For the first time, he had a place where the only thing expected of him was to learn and play. Still, as night came, he felt a strange emptiness. He missed his mother's voice, the smell of home-cooked food, and even the sound of the old floors creaking under his feet. But then he reminded himself why he was here. He sat at the piano in the practice hall and began to play softly. The notes comforted him. They were his family now. The next morning, classes began. The instructors were strict but kind. They taught him how to read music properly, how to control rhythm, and how to express emotion through sound. For the first time, he understood the structure behind the feelings he had always played from his heart. But not everyone welcomed him warmly. Some students looked at him with curiosity, others with quiet judgment. He was different. His clothes were simple and his background was no secret. Some whispered behind his back, calling him the servant boy. But Aaron didn't let their words break him. Every insult pushed him to work harder. Days turned into weeks, and Aaron spent every free moment practicing. He often skipped meals just to stay longer in the piano room. His teachers began to notice. One afternoon, the head instructor, an older man with kind eyes, stood by the door as Aaron played. When the piece ended, he said, "You don't play with your hands, boy. You play with your soul. That's something few ever learn." Those words became fuel for Aaron's spirit. As the months passed, his talent grew. He began composing small pieces of his own, soft melodies inspired by his mother and the mansion where his journey began. His classmates who once laughed at him now watched in awe. Some even came to him for advice. The boy who had once cleaned floors was now standing out among the most gifted students in the academy. One day, the sponsor who had discovered him came to visit. Aaron met him in the main hall. The man smiled warmly and said, "I heard you've been doing well, my boy. Your teachers speak highly of you." Aaron bowed respectfully. "Thank you, sir. I am trying to make you proud." The sponsor placed a hand on his shoulder. "Don't make me proud, Aaron. Make the world proud." That sentence stayed with him. From that day, Aaron poured every emotion into his practice. He no longer wanted to just play well. He wanted his music to mean something, to reach people who needed hope. He remembered how he used to listen through the door while others played. Maybe one day, his music could reach someone who felt small or unseen, just like he once did. A few months later, the Academy announced a special event, a grand recital where the best students would perform before guests from across the city. It was said that musicians, critics, and sponsors would attend. The chosen performer would receive a scholarship to travel abroad and study with a world-famous maestro. It was a dream opportunity. Aaron wanted to try, but doubt whispered in his mind. What if he wasn't ready? What if he failed? But his teacher encouraged him. "You have something no one else here does," the teacher said. "You have heart. Don't hide it. Show them who you are." For days, Aaron prepared. He practiced late into the night until his fingers ached. He rewrote his piece again and again, searching for the perfect way to tell his story through sound. The night before the recital, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window of his small room looking at the stars, thinking about his mother. He whispered softly, "I hope you can hear me tomorrow." When the day came, the academy was alive with excitement. Students dressed in their best clothes, the hall decorated with candles and flowers. The audience filled every seat. Sponsors, teachers, families, and even the famous sponsor who had discovered Aaron were all present. The air buzzed with anticipation. One by one, the students performed. Each played beautifully, earning applause and admiration. But when Aaron's turn came, something changed in the air. As he walked to the stage, whispers spread among the audience. Some still recognized him as the Maid's son from the mansion story that had quietly traveled around the city. Others were simply curious. The host introduced him politely, but there was a hint of doubt in his tone. Aaron sat at the piano, his heart pounding. For a brief moment, fear gripped him. He could feel every eye watching. Then he remembered his mother's voice. "Play because it makes you feel alive." He took a deep breath and began. The first notes were soft, gentle as a whisper. The melody rose slowly, carrying the warmth of memory and the ache of struggle. As he played, he no longer saw the crowd. He saw the old mansion, the nights of cleaning floors, the quiet encouragement of his mother, and the kindness of the man who gave him a chance. His fingers moved effortlessly, not guided by thought but by feeling. The music became his story, of laughter turned to silence, of dreams that refused to die. By the time the last note faded, the hall was still. Not a sound. Then suddenly applause broke out, soft at first, then louder, growing until the entire hall stood to its feet. Aaron blinked in disbelief. The sponsor wiped tears from his eyes. The teachers exchanged looks of admiration. Even the students who once doubted him clapped the loudest. When Aaron stood to bow, he saw something he never expected. His mother standing at the back of the hall. Someone had invited her. She was holding her scarf, tears shining in her eyes. Aaron's heart swelled. That moment, more than any award, was worth everything. After the recital, the judges announced the result. Aaron had won. He had been chosen to receive the scholarship. The sponsor walked up to the stage and hugged him proudly. "You did it," he whispered. "But remember, this is only the beginning." That night, the city lights sparkled brighter than ever. Aaron walked outside with his mother. They stood silently for a while, looking at the stars. His mother finally said, "Do you remember the day you asked if you could ever be good enough?" Aaron smiled. "Yes, you told me to play because it made me feel alive." She nodded. "And you did, my son. You made the world listen." He looked up at the sky and whispered a small thank you, to his mother, to the sponsor, and to the music that had carried him this far. The journey had been hard, but every note, every tear, every laugh had brought him here. As they walked back toward the academy, The faint sound of a piano drifted from a nearby window. Aaron smiled. He knew that his real journey as a musician had just begun. The world was vast, and there were still so many songs to play, so many hearts to reach. But for now he was content. He had proven that even the humblest beginnings could lead to something beautiful when the heart refused to give up. Years passed, and the city that once felt so large now felt like home to Aaron. He had grown taller, his face more mature, but the same kindness and humility still lived in his eyes. The scholarship he had won took him far beyond what he could have imagined. He studied under great musicians, traveled to different countries, and played in halls where people came just to hear his name. Yet no matter how far he went, he never forgot where his journey began. The mansion, the dusty piano, and his mother's voice reminding him to play because it made him feel alive. Aaron's rise in the world of music was not sudden. It was slow, full of lessons and challenges. He met people who believed in him and others who doubted him. But every time he felt lost, he would close his eyes and remember the sound of the old piano back home. It grounded him. He never wanted fame. He wanted connection. His music carried stories of love, of struggle, of hope. People said they could feel his heart in every note, and that was what made his performances unforgettable. One day, after a concert in a distant city, Aaron received a letter. It was from his hometown. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. His mother had written it. She told him that the old mansion was being restored into a cultural hall, and they wanted him to perform at its reopening. She wrote, "It would be a dream to see you play where it all began." Aaron read the letter again and again. His eyes filled with tears. He knew what he had to do. The journey back home took 2 days. As the train rolled through the countryside, memories flooded his mind. His mother working tirelessly, the nights he practiced in secret, the laughter of guests who once mocked him. Now he was returning not as the Maid's son, but as a musician the world had come to respect. Yet he felt no pride, only gratitude. When he arrived, the small town looked almost the same. The cobbled streets, the old bakery at the corner, even the faint smell of rain on stone. Everything brought warmth to his heart. His mother waited for him at the station. Her hair had turned gray, her steps slower, but her smile was still the same. When she saw him, her eyes filled with tears. They embraced for a long time without saying a word. Some moments don't need words. The next morning, they visited the mansion. It had changed. The walls had been repainted, the gardens cleaned, and the grand hall restored to its former beauty. But to Aaron, it was more than a building. It was the place that had shaped his destiny. Workers were arranging chairs and tuning instruments for the evening's event. The host, now much older, greeted him politely. He had once looked down on Aaron, but now he spoke with respect. "The hall wouldn't be complete without your performance," he said. As night fell, guests began to arrive. Many were from the city, others were locals who had heard of Aaron's success. The grand piano stood in the center of the hall, polished to perfection. Candles flickered softly around it. Aaron stood backstage, his hands trembling slightly. It wasn't fear, it was emotion. So much had happened, and it was all coming full circle. When his name was announced, the room erupted in applause. He walked to the piano slowly, bowing respectfully before sitting down. For a moment, he looked around the hall. He could see his mother sitting near the front, smiling through tears. The same piano that once separated him from the guests now waited for his touch. He placed his hands on the keys and began to play. The first few notes were soft, almost like a whisper from the past. The melody grew slowly, carrying the story of his journey, the loneliness, the laughter, the struggle, and the hope that had never died. Each note seemed to speak to someone in the audience. Some smiled, others wiped their eyes. The hall that had once been filled with mockery was now filled with reverence. Aaron didn't just play the piano, he spoke through it. The music flowed like a conversation between his heart and every soul in the room. When he reached the final chord, he let it linger, allowing the silence that followed to carry the weight of every memory. Then slowly he lifted his hands. The sound faded into stillness. The hall remained silent for a long time. Then one by one, people rose to their feet. The applause that followed was thunderous. It wasn't just appreciation. It was respect, love, and awe for the man who had once been dismissed as the Maid's son. Aaron stood bowed and smiled softly. His eyes found his mother's, and in that moment, he knew everything had come full circle. After the performance, people gathered around him, praising his music. But Aaron didn't stay long in the crowd. He quietly walked to the old piano after everyone left. His mother joined him. Together, they stood in silence. She placed her hand on his shoulder. "You did it, my son," she whispered. He turned to her, tears glistening in his eyes. "We did it," he said. "You believed when no one else did." She smiled, brushing his hair gently as she had when he was small. "Music has always been your voice. You just needed the world to listen." They sat by the piano for hours, talking softly. The candles burned low and the hall grew quiet again. It was as if time itself had paused to listen to their laughter. In the weeks that followed, Aaron stayed in town. He taught music to local children in the hall that had once denied him. He didn't charge them anything. He wanted them to feel what he once felt, the magic of sound, the power of dreams. He often told them, "Don't play to impress anyone. Play because it tells your story." One afternoon, as he watched a young boy struggle with a difficult piece, Aaron smiled. He saw himself in that boy, full of doubt but burning with passion. He guided the child's hands gently and said, "Let the piano speak for you. Don't force it. Feel it." The boy looked up and nodded. When he began again, the music sounded different, softer, more alive. Aaron's heart swelled with pride. Years later, when Aaron became a world-renowned pianist, people often asked him about the moment that changed everything. He never spoke about awards or fame. He always said, "It was the night they laughed at me. That laughter became my first teacher." He believed that pain could become art if you let it teach you instead of destroy you. When his mother grew older and weaker, Aaron stayed by her side. He played for her every evening. Sometimes she would close her eyes, smiling softly, and say, "That's my boy's heart I hear in those notes." Those moments were his most precious concerts. When she finally passed away peacefully, Aaron felt an emptiness deeper than words. But when he sat by the piano, the music came to him like a whisper from her. He played the same tune he had played the first time she told him not to give up. It was his way of saying goodbye. In the years that followed, Aaron continued to travel and perform, but he always returned to that old mansion-turned-hall. It had become a place of hope for young musicians. There, he created a foundation for children from humble backgrounds, giving them instruments, lessons, and most importantly, belief. Every performance he gave afterward carried a piece of his mother's wisdom, the warmth of his old home, and the courage of that small boy who once stood up to laughter. The world called him a master, but he always said, "I'm just someone who never stopped playing." And every time he finished a concert, as the crowd applauded, he would close his eyes and whisper to himself, "For you, Mother." The world may have known him as a pianist, but deep inside, he was still that boy from the kitchen doorway, the one who dared to dream with empty hands and a full heart. And through every melody, every note and every silence between them, his story continued to live. A story that began with laughter, but ended with music that touched the world.